As we've been discussing, the Bank of England has raised the base rate for the 10th time in a row, and the country trying to get things back on the tracks in terms of the economy. What does it mean for the consumers, though? Let's get the views now of Chris Southworth, Secretary General, of the International Chambers of Commerce in the United Kingdom. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Chris. I guess a lot of businesses will be perhaps steeling themselves for this, but it's yet more pressure on them, isn't it, as they try to make the books balance?
Well, I mean, the number one priority here is to cool inflation, isn't it? And to just to manage down borrowing and spending and just cool off the economy. Obviously, there are risks here that it slows growth, but I think the number one pressure right now is cost. So any effort to bring those costs down into a more manageable way, I think, is an understandable rationale. I don't think businesses will have too much opposition around that at this point.
Yeah, just looking at what the bank's been assessing in its statement then, or the sort of conference afterwards, turning the corners, the phrase they've used, and suggestions that perhaps even though we'll be heading to recession, shallower and shorter. Does this give a little bit of relief to businesses trying to look ahead and wanting certainty, of course?
Yeah, I mean, the forecast looks a little bit more optimistic. I think looking at this in the international trade environment, the UK is having a particularly hard time, harder than all our G7 competitors. So, the signals are that inflation will come down this year. So that's extremely welcome, of course. But I think every business in the country understands the pressures that the public is under and therefore the decisions that the Bank of England and the government need to make.
Yeah, and looking at prospects for the economy, the very fact that, perhaps we're not going to be doing that well in terms of growth, but the Eurozone, for instance, actually avoided recession the last quarter of last year. Suggestions that France may be doing quite well. So have we got sort of opportunity to export to the rest of Europe, even though perhaps things will be tight?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a huge, obviously, opportunity to improve exports. I mean, the most important point here is that, we need to grow the economy. What's missing in the growth strategy at the moment is trade. Trade wasn't mentioned at all in the budget.
Yeah.
But trade is absolutely central to the UK economy. We're an island economy. We're an import-export economy. We have a big footprint worldwide. We absolutely need strong relationships with the rest of the world, particularly Europe, where nearly half our trade is undertaken. So every effort right now to drive trade, to remove barriers to trade. We have the Electronic Trade Documents Bill going through Parliament right now. That's an absolute transformative piece of legislation that will allow us to remove all the paper out of the trade system, 4 billion documents worldwide, and allow us to remove some of those frictions that at the moment are really acting as a huge problem, particularly for small companies.
And of course, we're assessing where we are 3 years on from that Brexit sort of removal, and suggestions maybe that the protocol in terms of Northern Ireland, that we may be getting close to some kind of answer to that. I mean, how harmful has that been, and how hopeful are you that we are indeed getting to the end of that particular impasse?
Well, I think there's no doubt at all that Brexit has harmed the economy. I think there's been lots of commentary about that. Yeah. I think it's very, very clear in the figures, and it's very clear that that's the difference largely between us and our G7 competitors. The most important thing now is how we build back, so that problem is addressed over the course of time. The Northern Ireland issue is really important. We've obviously been in this impasse for a long time. What looks like an agreement with the EU on this idea of green lanes, red lanes for goods moving between the mainland and Northern Ireland and then into the continent, I think is a very pragmatic solution. That will be very, very welcome from a business point of view. And then I think importantly, this piece of legislation that I mentioned earlier on is going to give us the ability to take even more frictions out of that border environment between both us and Northern Ireland as the mainland, but also the UK and Ireland and Europe in general. So, it looks like we've got some positive signals coming. That's going to be extremely welcome. More positive relationships with Europe as well. I think that's extremely welcome. It's so important that we're working with our European colleagues to ultimately drive UK growth and opportunities that come with it.